Get on in here, get on in here, get on in here. What's up, everybody? A little Wednesday night love for you here on the Coast to Coast podcast from InsideCarolina.com. I am your host, Joey Powell. Happy to be here. Happy to see everybody on a Wednesday night. What's good, Sherrell, Sean? You guys can y'all hear me all right? We good? Yeah, maybe.
We're good.
I got a thumbs up from Sherrell. I got a nod from Sean, who's still wearing presentable work clothes. Shout out to the guy in the collar. That's good stuff. We are brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. So first off, I want to shout out to everybody who's already here in the chat. Again, know you guys aren't used to being a part of a show on a Wednesday night, but we're glad that you are here. Appreciate your patience and us not being able to do last Sunday as we expected. Sherrell has been battling the. Sherrell's actually had Corona 23, COVID 23. He's had the Coronas, and actually, it hasn't been COVID. It hasn't been the Coronas, but he's been absolutely fighting through it, and we're happy to see him. I actually texted Sherrell the other day, see how he was feeling, and he literally responded, "If the game were today, I would not play." So, love that from the guy. Glad to see him here. Sean, I'm glad you're here too. Glad you are well. Fellas, we got a lot to talk about. We had a big show lined up for Sunday, but hey, we're not going to make our guy fight through when he's absolutely unable to sit, much less talk to everybody. First things first, if you have not yet, subscribe, rate, review the show. You know the drill. We appreciate it. Been getting a lot of love on the iTunes reviews lately. We do read those. We've been seeing some good comments on social media. Shout out to people who've been giving comments to the host. Is totally not necessary, but we do see it. We do appreciate the love. The biggest thing for us is that you guys are happy with the content we're producing, and if you're not, we want to hear about it. If you are, let us know too. So rate, review, subscribe if you have not. If you're on us, if you're on live with YouTube tonight, hey, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You may have already gotten the notifications, but if you haven't and you want to get these notifications when we're about to do a live show, the only way you're going to get that is if you're subscribed to the Inside Carolina YouTube channel. All of the administrative stuff out of the way, boys. Let's talk about some preserves. Peach jam. Last week, it was probably what infected Sherrell. Probably what made him sick. Man, is one of the most, I guess, old school events of the year, to the point to where now ESPN's not even let people like take video of it. So you know it's some good activity going down in there. I'll go to you first, Sean. What were your biggest takeaways from the Peach Jam in Augusta about a week ago now?
Well, I'll start with a question actually for the both of you, because it was actually 10 years ago where I went to my first Peach Jam in person. So 2013 with the 2014 class, Theo Pinson, those guys. So, with all the hype that everybody was getting throughout Peach Jam on social media, et cetera, the next NBA superstars, went back and looked at the top 50, looking at Scout summer ranking. I actually went
Man,
through the top.
you're a glutton for punishment, bro.
But out of the top 50, how many do you think are still currently in the NBA? This is the top 50, not even the top 100.
I'll
Actually,
go.
Sherrell might cheat, so it might be just for you.
Yeah, I have to recuse myself because I know the answer. Because Sean
Well, I
already told me.
appreciate the honesty. I'll go with 9.
Ah, oh, I figured most people would be guessing, high 20s, 30s, but there's 14 by my count that are still in the NBA. So I think it shows, everybody's getting a lot of hype right now, but that can change. And the guys that do make it in the NBA, they're not all top 10 guys. There's going to be some that some fall out, some come in. So all that to say, I've been looking at these high school events maybe through a different, more skeptical lens as of late. But I think first and foremost was able to watch a lot of Team CP3. Would have been nice to see them play more than five games. But at the same time, I think for UNC fans, it was great, but at the same time, maybe not so great for the long term of Drake Powell being in Chapel Hill. But I think he had a fantastic weekend. We've been hearing how he'll rise in the rankings, already, I think, number 9 or number 8. And I think, especially after some of the play he had in EYBL 2, 3, 4, and then in Pangos, where he didn't make the top 30. USA Basketball didn't make the U19 team, but I think he showed why he is a top 10, top 5, maybe even higher player given the class, as well as his two-way versatility. I think one, the athleticism, two, if he can shoot the ball consistently, which he did this weekend, 9 for 18 from 3, and he brings us a defensive ability that a lot of other players in the class don't, even if they're focused, just don't have the natural makeup, to have that type of defensive effort. And then that 18, I think it was 18 points, 18 rebounds. That game was pretty impressive. So that was obviously the main story. Spent a lot of time mostly watching CP3, along with some of the younger guys as well. But also enjoyed hearing what Sherrell had to say as he got to watch it in person.
I have very rarely seen Sherrell McMillan like just completely enamored with a player, and I don't know if it's because you followed him for so long, Sherrell, but watching Drake's, I guess, most recent phase of evolution is nuts. I mean, Eric Bossi is now on the record saying he thinks Drake Powell is one of the top 5 players in this class. So we've seen him go from, out of the top 50 to now top 10, and a lead basketball recruiting analyst for 24/7 saying top 5. Sherrell, what jumped out at you in Augusta? What was new that you saw at a Drake's game other than what you termed, and I'm going to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying here because I think I might get the sentiment right, the most disgusting block you've ever seen in a live game before. So I want to ask you, what did you see from Drake Powell at Peach Jam that you had not seen before from him?
I want to say nothing, but I think for Drake, all the time, dating back to last year, it was, man, this kid, if he can develop an offensive game, he's already got the athleticism, and you can put strength on him, and he's already got the defensive prowess. That was always what it was. And if his offense catches up, well, his offense is caught up, and not only is it becoming more consistent, it's super efficient. I mean, he shot 50% from 3, and it's not like he had limited attempts. It's not like he wasn't, the second leading scorer on the team. It's not like he was a guy that everyone didn't know about and just came out and had an amazing weekend. It's like, oh, who's Drake Powell? He had a reputation coming in. So it's not like he wasn't on the scouting reports for the opposing coaches, and he still was able to get to his spots, still able to rise above people and shoot. The elevation he gets on his jump shot, man, I'm telling you, it is very interesting that he can do that, because it's like, I think we described it before as him kind of being on a trampoline. He just gets so high that it's almost impossible to block his shot. So I think the offense has just come around, and not only has it come around and caught up with the defense, it hasn't passed the defense, but it's into that, starting to get into that elite territory. So I think that was the biggest thing, is that he's now really as complete of a player, I think, as you can be at this stage in your development, because he's a two-way guy. He's a true two-way player. He can guard, I would say 1 through 3 right now. I mean, in high school, he can guard 1 through 5. In college, he can probably guard 1 through 3 because of his length. In college, he'll be able to play the 2 and the 3, I think, pretty competently. Against a smaller team, who knows? Maybe he could even play the 4. He just has that kind of versatility, and it goes back to, excuse me, just how we talked about him being, who's going to be the lottery pick on the next lottery pick for Carolina, or who's going to be the next guy who can be in that top 15 and that top 10. Well, because of his measurables, he already had a leg up, and now all the counting stats are catching up. All of the production that you wanted to see is catching up. So it's no longer potential; it's here. So I think that's the big thing with Drake, is that he's tapped into that potential. He can still get better. Don't get me wrong, but he finished 3rd in the EYBL Peach Jam in rebounding. At 6'6",
from
6'5",
from the wing,
right, from the wing, 11 rebounds a game. So it was just a really impressive performance by him all around, and I think that's why you're seeing folks talk about him in top 5. And when they say top 5, I don't think they mean number 5 either.
I mean, in my mind, Trey Johnson would be, and that's more from an offensive perspective in terms of what he brings. I don't think he has it on the defensive side of the floor, but we also talked about the weakness of the 24 class and how really the top 3 guys are 25 and 26. So that, there's something there, but he'd probably be the one guy offensively in what he did on the USA circuit. But I think in the chat, Andrew Prevost brought this up. But literally a year ago, I'm in Kansas City watching EYBL. The next week, Sherrell's in Peach Jam watching EYBL, and Drake's playing on the U16 circuit, and he's blending in. He's pass first. You can see the size, and I remember interviewing him, and I was like, all right, this guy's a legit 6'6", 6'7". Usually they're more 6'4", 6'5" once you get to size them up. But you could see his size, but at the same time, he was blending in. And the question was, is UNC going to offer? I think Wes Miller in Cincinnati, they were watching a lot of his games, and they were probably hoping to pounce in if UNC did not offer. And the offer did come, and at that point in time, you wouldn't have seen just in 1 year the difference. But I think that's the fun part of really that sophomore to junior year transition is a lot of guys in the 40s or 50s come the next year they can be in the top 5 or 10 with some improvement.
Well, and we've seen a lot of players that have not made that jump, right? And I think the through line here for folks that are listening and watching is that you guys said from the beginning, if he can do these things, well, now he's done these things and he's done them incredibly convincingly. Sean, I know you don't really like player comps, but I'm gonna kind of twist your arm on this one. Sherrell, short answer for you too. Sean, can you think of anybody that's had this sort of trajectory from being a complimentary player that had potential to, okay, now he's really jumping off the screen every chance he gets? Can you think of anybody like that since you've been following recruiting?
I mean, well, this is more COVID related, but when UNC offered Cam Whitmore, I believe he was in the hundreds, but I think that was more, not being seen.
But it's right. Aside from COVID.
Yeah. But I mean, I want to go back to, I feel like Naz Little had a similar, he had hit a pretty high jump.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think that year, the junior to, sophomore to junior year, he's obviously now past the junior year, but that was when he made the leap. And I think that's when you do see the higher fluctuations more so than, that's the volatility starts to, shrink as you're going junior to senior year. But, Dylan Harper, for instance, he was in the 40s last year, and now he's the number one player in the class. But I think one more, but Brandon Ingram wasn't to that extent, but
Okay.
there was a guy where, we all got to watch him at NBPA Top 100 in late June, and you're like, man, is this guy ever, like, when is, he's just running up and down the floor, shooting threes when he gets the ball, and just was a guy on the floor. And then literally a week, 2 weeks later, first live period in Chicago, the light flipped, and here he was. And Roy Williams was early in terms of that identification, and then you had everybody else coming. But I remember it was a game against Jaylen Brown in Chicago that was kind of the flip on that switch. So it does happen a lot, and that's probably the fun part about recruiting and following it closely, is when is that going to happen for a select few.
Yeah, same question, Sherrell. And well, hang on. Same question for you, but also I would be remiss if I didn't mention this also shows Hubert Davis's acumen for identifying talent early as well. Go ahead, Sherrell. Same question to you.
Yeah, I was going to go there too, but I think Nasir Little is probably the one that comes to mind the most, because he was viewed as like a top 35, top 30 player, I think, kind of entering around this time. And then, he just played really well on the Adidas circuit, played really well for his high school and national games, of course, tore up the McDonald's game and the Jordan Classic. And I think he might have ended up being number 3 in 24/7's rankings.
In some rankings, he was as high as 3. Yeah.
So you're talking about a guy who went from, mid-30s to number 3 in about a year. And I think Drake is on a very similar trajectory. So that's the first one that came to mind. As far as the Hubert Davis thing, yes, Drake Powell loved North Carolina and coveted a North Carolina offer. However, he had to receive an offer to be able to commit there. And I think UNC, I've learned more about this in the last couple of months, but not only did they say we'll take Drake, but they also immediately cut off communication with someone like Cam Scott. It's the reason that they didn't keep in contact with Isaiah Evans. So they made a solid commitment to Drake in August of last year when he wasn't ranked top 5 or wasn't ranked top 25. So it does say something, I think, about what they see and what they value, and they're kind of reaping the rewards now.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because definitely Cam Scott and Evans are some of the players that get mentioned a lot of times. Meanwhile, Drake Powell is doing every single thing he can do to cement himself as a premier blue chip player in this class. All right, so moving away from the Peach Jam, and let me tell you, the fat boy in me does not like to get away from Peach Jam for any reason. Let's talk about Isaiah Harwell. Talking to some of the 25 guys. Sherrell, this is not Peach Jam. This is the 3SSB event down in Rock Hill. There was a couple of different players on UNC's radar, both of whom happened to be shooting guards, and they're both about the same height, very similar builds. We'll talk about Isaiah Harwell first, and then we'll move on to Darren Peterson. But what was your gleaning from Harwell's performance? And again, want to point this out: he was early offered by Hubert Davis and his staff as what, a sophomore? Is that right?
Yeah, he was the first offer in 2025 by UNC,
Yeah.
and that was last September. So
Okay.
he's had an offer for not quite a year, 9 months and change. He was good. He was clearly tired. I think if you check out the story that we wrote about his winning ways, he's had an incredibly busy summer. Plays out in Utah, so they're on a national schedule. Um, didn't get a chance to rest really after high school season. Went straight into AAU, left AAU, went to a few camps, went from the camps to USA, left USA, back to AAU. So he's just been literally around North America playing basketball for the last 3 months without much of a break. I said all that to say his team ended up winning the 3SSB championship. Last year they finished runner up. This year they won. And it wasn't for his dynamic performances, I would say, but more so of just him being sturdy and solid. This wasn't like last year where he was going out and scoring 28 and 30 points a game. And I think actually is a healthy thing. One, because he's playing with a good team, and two, because he's been able to not run the show like a lead guard, but see the floor better and kind of help his teammates get their stuff going. Not from a Carolina perspective, but they have a kid named Jackson Johnson on their team who is a shooter. And I think he's going to be one of those you see in a few years at Utah or BYU or wherever he attends, USC. I'm gonna be like, man, that kid's good at basketball. But overall, yeah, I like Harwell's game. He's so strong for his age. This is his second straight year of playing 17 and under, and he's only a rising junior. So that's pretty impressive. Um, just a big body guy who can get into the paint and kind of punish defenders. And we'll talk about another player who's very similar. But yeah, I mean, Harwell is a good player. The class of 2025 is kind of the headline. We can talk about that later, but he's kind of maintaining his position as one of those top 15 guys in that class.
Well, so let's move on to another player in that class that we mentioned from the 3SSB event, Darren Peterson. He's from Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, which, if I remember anything, it's just a great place to get brake pads from Callahan Auto. But what can you tell us about Darren Peterson, his performance at the 3SSB event?
I mean, like, people use like terms like man child and beast, and they use it lightly, but I mean, he's just so strong and big to be a 16-year-old kid. I'm like, are you sure you're 16? He's playing 16 and under for his team, but he's just a massive kid. And then he is so aggressive when he's attacking. And I would say his offensive skill set is so advanced from, we talked to him. He's trains with some pros. He's got connections with those guys, and you can tell just his level of skill is just different from a lot of the players in his class, especially his position. I think that was the biggest thing, was that you combine someone who's legit 6'6", someone, I think he was listed at 180, but he's 200 pounds, like a well built, like tight end type player, and he's playing on the wing, playing guard. And it's just not a combination you see often. So I like the way he plays. I like his aggressiveness, his physicality, just kind of a bruising, athletic guy on the wing.
Those
And
are
he,
those. Are, go ahead, Sean.
I was just gonna say, and going into that first live period, it wasn't a new name since he had an offer, but I think one of the players we were most excited to follow, just given one what he did on the USA circuit, first team in the FIBA All Americas, leading or tied for the leading scorer on the USA team, but how he was scoring, where he was scoring, what he was doing. I think you could see that in the highlights, high school wise. But in terms of his upside and where he's at, hopefully it is in UNC, but he's definitely special.
So Sean, give me a little bit of, I guess, wide angle view of both of those players and kind of how their games might be similar and different. I know Sherrell pointed out some specifics that he'd seen from that event in Rock Hill, but what do you know about their games and what are kind of the hallmarks of their games at this phase in their careers?
I mean, I think you can look at both of them and it's not always a great comparison, but looking at what they did on the FIBA circuit, you had Peterson, who was first team, 16, 17 points a game, go-to guy. And then you had Harwell, made the team, which is a accomplishment in itself, but coming off the bench, 13 minutes, kind of, I think average 4 or 5 points. So a big difference in terms of that performance for two top 10 guys. But I think that show, Peterson in terms of really being one of the top players in the class with the highest NBA potential. But I think he's really a shooting guard that is kind of the prototypical shooting guard that UNC fans have always wanted or used to have in terms of what he can do, shoot the ball from three, but also create and use his size to get to the rim and finish explosively. Harwell, I think needs a little work on his shooting, but a big, stocky guy that allowed him to play U17, after his freshman year, which is rare. So he had that strength, ability to handle the ball, and I think is not as the natural gifted scorer that Peterson is, but a guy that can control the game and can do a little bit of everything.
Appreciate that. So another name that came out of the recent past, and again, UNC staff is out all over the place right now, and Inside Carolina is going to let you know what we can and from what Sherrell's able to source, and Sean's always breaking down film and putting that out there. But another name just came out of nowhere. Travis Branham from 24/7 Sports shared that North Carolina was watching a 2024 small forward from Australia at the NBA Academy event down in, I think it's in Atlanta. 6'7", 180 from Australia, Johnny Furphy. Now, first off, I didn't know that was a real name. I felt like that was a made-up name. That was something like a guy that lived, the floor below Jerry on Seinfeld. But either way, he is a real kid. Sherrell, what can you tell us about Johnny Furphy and him popping up on the 2024 radar right now after a strong weekend?
Yeah, not a ton. So we do try to kind of, ascertain where the UNC staff is at. So we know they were in Rock Hill at Adidas. We know they were at Peach Jam, EYBL. We know they took a trip to Under Armour, which was outside Atlanta, actually in Cartersville. But then, like you said, the NBA Academy is also in Atlanta. And we got a tip, and I guess it was Saturday, that UNC was there. At the time, had no idea who they were there for. And then, Travis, shortly texted me and Ben and said, "Hey, it's for this kid." I think the compelling thing about his story is that no one knew who he was a few months ago, and so he reclassed into 24. But I wonder if, as he's getting these offers and getting high major attention, if there might be the temptation to reclass back into 2023. And from a UNC perspective, I think that would make a ton of sense. I've seen a few people on the board asking, why is UNC looking at a wing in 2024 when they said they couldn't offer Isaiah Evans, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I think that could be your answer. Do we know that they're recruiting him for 2024, or do we think they're recruiting him for 2023? We don't have that answer. That's kind of me speculating a little bit. But when you start connecting dots and thinking how things might fit,
Yep.
I think that's the more plausible scenario of the two.
I think it's something that that you guys always do a really good job when you're breaking out a recruitment for North Carolina with regard to roster management is, hey, read what's not there, read between the lines, try to assume your phrasing, connecting the dots. I know nothing, but I will throw out, I'm fairly certain one of the things that got North Carolina intrigued by him was that in Australia you can order from Johnny T-shirt and still have things delivered, right? Like global delivery literally circles the globe. You can order Johnny T-shirt gear and get it in Australia. You can be on the Perth side, you can be on the Sydney side. But either way, if you need your UNC gear, we're talking to you, Johnny Furphy. You can go to Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com. And I'm not sure that Mr. Furphy is a premium member here at Inside Carolina, but if he was, he could use his code found on the message boards, get an extra 10% off, and save himself some Australian dollars there. Either way, if you are listening to the show or watching the show, you know how much we love Johnny T-shirt, locally owned, alumni owned and operated. They've been big supporters of IC for a long time. We can't say enough good things about them. Go ahead and get on in there now as they start getting their stuff in for football season when the fall gets back in. You know how weird the weather can be at the beginning of the fall season. You know, you're hotter than two rats making love in a wool glove, and by the November games, you're freezing your behind off. So go ahead and get your football gear now as Johnny T-shirt's starting to get it. They've got all of the brands, the best stuff you can think of. Go ahead and hook them up. Johnny T-shirt right there on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill, or JohnnyT-shirt.com. Tell them IC sent you. Tell them Joey, Sherrell, and Sean sent you. Either way, they will take care of whatever your needs are. We're going to take a quick break. This would be a pause where John Siegley can produce and add in some ads for those of you who are listening to this in your podcast feeds. And now we'll move on and talk about the current roster of UNC. And shout out to the quite a few folks that are listening to us right now. Sherrell, you and Sean and I have kind of batted this ball back around multiple times as the season ended back in March, talking about how to analyze North Carolina's roster management, how they shopped through the portal, how they handled kids reclassing, because they had all of these things happen. And it's been incredibly interesting to see. We shared with folks, hey, wait until Father's Day, wait until the middle of June. I think you said the 15th. I may have forced the Father's Day time upon you, Sherrell, but we wanted people to kind of sit back and wait. Well, now we've given them an extra month, and wouldn't you know it, last week we found out there was another player joining the class in James Okonkwo, leaving West Virginia after Bob Huggins is, I didn't quit, I got fired, I didn't get fired, I'm still working, whatever. James Okonkwo is now coming to North Carolina. Sean, before we get to analyzing the entire roster and talking about how UNC did collectively, have you had a chance to dig in any more? I know he performed at the FIBA Nationals for England, looked really good in some instances, looked like the young player or the player early in his experience as he is. What were your major takeaways from seeing that?
So he's played 4 games. They finished up pool play yesterday. They went 2-2, but based on the results today, they did make it into the bracket play. So quarterfinals against Macedonia, I do believe. So he still has a little more game left. Over those 4 games, averaged 12 and 11. So pretty solid. He had 3 games in double figures, 1 game only 5 points. From a offensive perspective, shot around 56% from 2. And I think in this situation, he was able to do, which we expected more than he was allowed to do at West Virginia. He had some nice drives from the perimeter, showcased his offensive rebounding ability, and that'll hopefully be one thing that comes out in the video afterwards, is just when the ball goes up, he looks to track it and he goes aggressively after that. And I think whatever level you're playing at, that not everybody has that innate ability and interest in chasing the ball from offensive rebounding perspective. So that's obviously one of his strengths we talked about. He's as one of the better players, he's been a little more freedom. So he's launched a few threes, 0 for 5 from there. They haven't looked too good. The one he did make, he stepped out of bounds on the left corner. But I wouldn't expect to see him launching too many of those going forward. And then, another kind of from a advanced stats perspective, high turnover rate at West Virginia. That's been proven correct as well here, where he has turned the ball over a fair amount, had 8 turnovers in one of his better games. Some of those, when you actually watch them, you're like, was that really an offensive foul, or was that really the turnover on him? But he's been a little careless with passing and maybe not as aggressive when double teams come to get him. But overall, it's been good, and it's just more experience for him. And I think going back to the conversation we had after the commitment is, I think as long as expectations are proper for him, then everybody should be pleased, whether that's, 2 minutes a game or 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever that is. I think he brings some skills and can be solid off the bench and in minutes where it's needed.
And I got to stop hitting the mute button because I'm not the one that has the coughing issues, but apparently I did. James Okonkwo is one of the where he's the most recent addition to this class, to UNC's roster. We're not really sure what's next, but we'll obviously keep you abreast. But I think Okonkwo is a depth piece. Not to say that he will only be used, as a depth piece, but that he does provide some depth behind Armando Bacot. We talked about, Bacot's injury issues, starting all the way back with the ankle or the ankle against Ohio State his freshman year, and then the ankle against Kansas. He had some ankle issues on and off last year. A guy like Okonkwo is going to be able to provide some relief, whether it's injuries or fouls or whatever in the post for him and both Jalen Washington. So, guys, one of the things we want to do, and this was kind of my big topic. I hinted at it at our last show. I want to make sure we got to it tonight. Was let's analyze as we sit here in the middle of July how North Carolina has done addressing their needs from last season. I'll set you up with kind of a couple of caveats that Hubert Davis shared on his last coach's show. And I want to shout out to Sherrell for pointing me to where that transcript was before we got on the air tonight. These were the key things that Hubert Davis said on his final coach's show that he wanted, that he wished they had done better last season and would be focuses or focuses, whatever, moving towards this coming season. So first things first, he said that he thought he used the bench well, but he wanted to use the bench more. Statistically speaking, North Carolina used their bench 18.3% of the time, which was well below the national average of 30.6. So first things first, guys, do you think North Carolina is in a better place to use their bench than they were in the past? And there's a next step that I want to get to about developing the bench. So let's specifically talk right now about, does North Carolina have a more bench ready team since they've made these changes on the roster since since April? Sherrell, I'll go to you first.
I mean, let's ask Hubert Davis, and we'll have the answer. It seems like they do. They're more experienced. They're veteran laden, but by the same token, the team last year was. I should say the starting five was.
Right.
So maybe that is the differentiator in that some of the guys we expect to come off the bench have played high major, college basketball for several years. So I think if you're saying, do players 7, 8, and 9, are they going to come in and be more of a net negative, or excuse me, a net neutral than the team last year? Then I think you have to say yes, just because they've had the experience, they've played, they've been there. And I think the talent level is probably about the same as what UNC had coming off the bench last year. But you've got probably a combined 12 or 13 years of college experience.
And that's
So I'll
just
say
a
yes.
Cormac Ryan. Sorry. And one of the things I think, if you look at North Carolina coming into last year, as you said, Sherrell, the starting five was incredibly experienced, very veteran first five group they had. But their immediate reserves were Puff Johnson, whose most of his exposure had been in the Final Four. Dontrez Styles, who's I think most of his play was in that Baylor game that went on forever, and DeMarco Dunn, who was kind of a largely unknown player. Right now, the guys they're coming to off the bench, as you mentioned, are guys that have played, Division I ball in some places. And even if you look at a player like a Jalen Washington, who came back and was already on the roster, he had some experience, and he's probably the least experienced of the guys they're bringing in. Sean, I want to ask you the same thing. Do you feel like North Carolina addressed the needs of having a bench that they can trust?
I think they did address the needs of having a bench they can trust. I still think a true wing or another wing would be ideal off that bench, another 6'5", 6'6" guy. But, and whether that was Puff or DeMarco, I think that could have been beneficial. But you have, the sophomores that stuck around. They have a year of experience, so they're not coming in and trying to learn the system. You have Wojcik, who has leadership qualities and has played 4 years of basketball, and then you have Okonkwo who's played time as well. So I think there should be more trust in the bench, but I think it's also going to be largely dependent on, hey, is this team playing to their, especially early on, are they playing to their competition in that first half? And Hubert Davis is not confident that by playing, it always seemed like, hey, these guys aren't getting out to a lead, but I don't trust anybody else to change it. So I'm rolling with these guys. And I think if the starting team, the top 5 or 6, can get a lead and play well, I think that allows the bench more opportunities. But will he be able to trust, or will he be able to figure out what are the how do people play together? What's the right situations? Or is it just going to be kind of, hey, let's see how you do in the first half, and that's going to determine how you play in the second half if it's a tight game. So I do think they added some bench strength. I think it's stronger overall, but what is that chemistry like, and how much does that trust go?
Sean, I want to ask you as well. Looking at what UNC has now, they've got more guys spread out over different years and different classes. How do you feel like that sets them up for the ability to develop the bench more? Because that was another thing that Hubert Davis said in his last show, was that he wanted to develop his bench. Where do you see them having made improvements, or how would you say they have made improvements with the bodies that they've brought in so far?
I think it's hard now with the transfer portal, and guys can leave so easily if they're not getting the playing time, or they don't want to develop, or they don't see that path. But I think there's going to be could be a big exodus of Armando and Cormac, for sure, and then who knows what happens with RJ, Elliott, etc. So I think we've always wanted to see UNC in a position where they're able to not have to fully reload. I think this year they did out of a different circumstance, but that you kind of want that continuation. So that really goes to Trimble and Washington, and how are they going to do from that freshman to sophomore year leap, and then can they potentially step into starting roles as juniors? So I think it's going to be a big question mark in terms of how does that team the following year look. Are they going to have to attack the portal? I don't think it'll need to be as aggressive, but at the same time, you do have some pretty strong freshmen coming in. So, I feel not great about it, but I feel good in terms of what they have, and a little bit of the mix. But it is, I'd say, a little top heavy right now on some of those guys that have been here for a while, and what their aspirations may be in terms of how long are they in college if they play well.
Sherrell, I'm going to let you do a little hypothetical here, but looking at UNC's depth chart for 23 and 24, and shout out to Sean for keeping this posted on the message boards all the time. For guys that we know will be gone next year as seniors, Armando Bacot, Paxton Wojcik, Cormac Ryan, there's potential if RJ Davis or Jalen Withers want to return that could happen. We don't know. Harrison Ingram, Seth Trimble, Jalen Washington, Zayden High, Elliott Cadeau, and then the incoming 24s. Sherrell, what does developing the bench look like to you next year? What does it look like with the bodies that Hubert Davis brought in? What does that, hypothetically, what does developing the bench mean for next season?
Yeah, I think it just means for next season. I think you start developing your bench on June 15th, whenever those guys come in, and sometime in February, you're kind of done. I don't think anymore in college basketball you can develop your bench over the course of years, just because, like Sean said, the likelihood that someone's going to stay through that is slim. There are players on the team this year who, had they decided to stay, they would have had major roles on the team this year, just because of some of the things that Sean mentioned this team might be lacking. But they wanted to go play, and they had seen in their first year or their second year that they didn't think they were going to play as much as they should, so they left. So I think any notion that we can kind of look forward into 2024, 25, I don't think that fits with where college basketball is right now. So it when it talks about developing the bench, it's it's always role definition for me within season. There needs to be clear expectations about what player X's job is, the playing time you expect player X to have, and if player X can earn more time by playing better or by playing along someone who might play the same position. All that stuff needs to be communicated now, so that it's clear when you go into fall practice. There's no, but I thought you said that I was going to play 25 minutes, and it was no. You had the opportunity to play 25 minutes if A, B, C, D, E, F on the list. So I think right now, bench development is about communication almost as much as anything. Once the season starts, then it'll be about matchups and
Right.
is the opposing team playing two bigs? Are they playing 2 point guards? Do they have a 6'8" wing? Do they have a 6'4" wing? Those kind of things. But right now, it's about everybody understanding what the coaching staff wants them to do, accepting that role, or having a conversation about what the role should be, and then everyone moving forward together. So I think that was part of the issue the last couple of years, is that the roles, though they seemed maybe clear on TV, I don't know if everybody had the same
Hmm.
idea at the same time.
Okay,
And that's something that Hubert Davis said he needs to grow. In that same coach's show, he said he needs to grow. He's a second-year head coach. He's still learning, and I think that's true. People think that's a cop out, but it is true. I mean, it's part of the deal. When you hire someone who's never been a head coach before, they have to learn how to do it. And so I think you'll see some growth from him in that aspect from year 2 to year 3.
definitely shows some self-awareness on his part. And I think maybe, to use one of your favorite phrases, maybe now developing the bench is just as much about roster management as it is about actually growing players. Maybe it's about managing personalities, managing who's on the team, but also recognizing, who's available to put on the team very shortly. One of the big things I think that North Carolina fans and IC subscribers would critique about last year was just their inability to shoot. They had shooters on the team. They did not have makers, to use an old Roy Williams phrase, at least not consistently, to the point that they were last in the ACC in 3-point percentage last year at 31.2. Sean, did this roster become better shooters in the last 3 months?
Based on last year's percentages, they did. I mean, I think you have RJ Davis, who I think everybody has high expectations coming into his senior year. I think Cormac Ryan, and the thing about Cormac and Ingram, a lot's going to depend on, for Cormac, can he get back to 2 years ago, how he shot? Ingram has been shooting 30%. Can he get to 33 to 35? But I think those guys do have the potential. And then you have Withers, who was one of the top shooters in the ACC this past year. So they definitely address shooting from how it looks. Whether that all can coexist still remains to be seen. But I think we probably got a lot wrong on that over/under show that we did.
Why you got to bring up old stuff, bro?
Last year. But if you were to say, hey, are they going to be 322nd in 3-point shooting, I think that number is going to go up. But I also think it's going to go up because of the ball movement and having a team that the ball's not going to stick. And ideally, everybody's looking for each other. Once again, adding Elliot Cadeau, who is a passing savant, I think will play huge dividends for everybody in terms of what he's able to do and some of the shots he's able to find people. But I think it's also going to be up to the Cormacs and Ingrams of showing that improvement, or showing what people are expecting of them to get their percentages up a little bit.
Sherrell, I'm going to ask you, and I've seen some kind of undertones in the chat about this as well. Does having a pass-first point guard make this team a better shooting team? And for example, I will say, this has nothing to do with Elliot Cadeau shooting personally, but does having a pass-first true lead guard, taking the ball out of RJ Davis's hands so that he doesn't have to create for himself and allowing him to be created for, does that make this team a better shooting team?
Yeah, I'm glad you said Elliot Cadeau and not just a lead guard, because any lead guard can't do what Elliot Cadeau can do. And I know we're heaping a lot of expectations on, a true freshman coming in, but to Sean's point, he is kind of a passing savant. And naturally, if you have someone who can get you the ball in better spots and get you open shots, you would expect that percentage to go up because these are all college basketball players. It's not like they're incompetent and they can't do some of the things. They wouldn't be playing college basketball if they weren't. So I expect Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan, even RJ Davis, they're going to get a lot of open looks. Jalen Withers is going to get a lot of open looks from that corner, on the wing, wherever. And I think they'll knock them down at a better rate. I think if you just go one for one, kind of, I hate to do that, but one for one, like who they lost and who they gained as far as 3-point shooting, I think it's pretty clear that it's better. And Paxton Wojcik, I don't think we should sleep on him tremendously. I'm not saying he's going to come in and be a Caleb Love replacement and start, you know, 20 games and play 18 minutes a game or anything like that. But I do think he is going to have a role on the team, and part of that role is going to be knocking down open shots. So you've added, hundreds of threes between Withers and Wojcik and Ryan, and I think Ingram is a better shooter than maybe he's shown. And then the other thing is too, Ingram basically was a point guard essentially, at Stanford. Cadeau, as we talked about, is a savant. RJ Davis was, point guard 1A, 1B on a team that went to the Final Four. There's three guys who I think can move the ball around, to Sean's point, and just provide a lot more open looks than they got last year. It felt like so many of the looks last year were, shot clock, 3 seconds left, guys hanging off of their arms,
Fade up.
from the corner. Yeah, from the corner. Everything just felt difficult. And I think this year, Cadeau and Ingram and Ryan and Davis will make it easier than it was last year, at least to get those open shots.
Well, you've also got three guys that can handle the ball, could potentially break a press. And speaking of Paxton Wojcik, I mean, he may not be a microwave, but he could be a toaster oven, right? Like he could absolutely be a guy that could come in and he may not get you, like you said, 20 minutes and 18 points, but he might be able to give you 10 minutes and give you 8. He might be able to give you 6 minutes and give you 8. All of those things are valuable.
Think about how much North Carolina. I mean, we could sit here and do the math, but if they had someone who could come in and go 2 for 5 from 3 off the bench every game, they probably
just be a threat.
They probably win 3 or 4 more games just from that.
And just be a threat. Just be a guy that other teams have to respect, so that they're not playing, you're not playing 4-on-5 on offense. All right, so putting a bow on that a little bit, we're going to take a couple of questions before we get out of here. I've seen some in the chat that I like. Again, we'll try to, just because we don't answer your question doesn't mean we don't like you, or your mama's got bad breath or anything like that. It just means that we either can't answer it, or it's probably not something we feel like would bring a lot to the show. But we do appreciate you guys putting your questions in here. Let's go ahead and hit this question here from our guy Willie T. And Willie asks, who's your guess of the first guard off the bench? I'm not touching that. Sean, I'll go to you first.
First guard off the bench, Seth Trimble.
Okay. Sherrell?
Yeah, you tell me who's starting, I can tell you who's the first guard off the bench. But,
no, you don't get extra. You don't get a little extra hints, bro.
Yeah, I think people's assumptions are Cadeau and Davis will start. Then I think it'll be Trimble. I think Trimble will play maybe more than people expect, just because of his defensive prowess. And he's, again, freshman to sophomore. That's when players make the biggest jump. So I think he has the ability.
Well, and hey, look, I know it's a very uber small, minute sample size, but the videos that have been out there of him playing, like, his shot has been completely rebuilt. And I think that was one of the reasons he probably didn't play as much last year, is because he didn't have a lot of offense that he was either confident in, or the coaching staff was confident in, or both. And I will say his shot mechanically looks totally different. We'll talk about that in a future episode. Next question, I want to ask this one. Our guy Andrew Prevost is getting all kinds of love tonight from Sean, but also asking good questions. He says, who do we have that can guard a 2 to 3 on the wing? Sean, I'm kicking that one to you first too.
It's a great question. I think goes to the bench potentially needing somebody like that, but in terms of Cormac Ryan, I think is a little underrated defensively. So he's going to be, it is going to be a drop off going from Leaky pretty much taking out the top offensive player to a guy like Cormac Ryan, but I think he can do a strong enough job. But I think losing that lockdown defender will definitely hurt. I think you're hoping to make it up on the offensive end, where you're able to space the floor and and have scoring threats at every position. So it is a great question, and I think that's probably the biggest concern in terms of what happens if UNC matches up. Yeah, I'm thinking, when UNC matched up with Auburn in the Sweet 16, that team was just too athletic and spaced the floor. Really good team, but what happens when they match up with one of those SEC type teams, whether that's in the tournament, and are they able to guard man to man? The 2, 3, and 4.
Sherrell, same question.
I'm going to cheat again. I'm going to say Seth Trimble again, simply because his athleticism, I think it's underrated. He's really strong for his size, and I think he's a legit 6'3", 6'3.5". So he's got good size, and I know what people think about when they say, "Oh man, Carolina can't guard those huge wings," but there aren't a ton
Who
of teams
can?
who have. Yeah, there's not a ton of teams who have 6'8" guys who can shoot lights out. And I think a lot of defense, again, talking to people who know basketball more than me, is about intensity, is about effort, is about desire. And you can make up for some of those physical deficits, being 3 or 4 inches shorter than someone by just being all up in them, by being in their space, by bothering them. I think Trimble can do that. So I'll say Trimble. I think he'll get the assignment sometimes when maybe there's a player cooking and they just need someone to harass him for some time. I think Trimble can do it.
I could definitely see that as him becoming the agitator, right? Like a guy that just literally you need an ice bath to go cool somebody off. Because if anything, the Carolina fans remember, like it feels like every year, you know, a couple of times a season there is some guy that comes out of nowhere. We saw it last year against Iowa State. You saw it against a handful of other teams, all the way back to like Harold Arsenault. Where guys just come out of nowhere and they're full on just torching the entire arena, and then they go back to averaging like 4 points for the rest of the season. This could be a situation where, like you said, Sherrell, a guy like Seth Trimble could bring a lot of value to this roster. All right, boys, let's get out of here. Anything you want to add before we put a nice, neat wrapping on this show tonight? Sherrell, you got anything for us? 2 pennies.
Yeah, want to shout out Tyler Gilbert as an IC Premium member. He helps us out a lot when we all can't be on the road, and so like if I'm in Adidas and he's at EYBL, he'll text and say, "Hey, I think they're watching so and so." So just having people like that, you develop relationships over the years, is huge, and thankful for him. And then my other headline is just the class of 2025. Man, it is. I think maybe how poorly nationally the 23 and 24 classes
Yeah, the
have
opposite.
been kind of talked about. It's maybe they're overcompensating with 2025, but there are some really good players. I mean, Cameron Boozer, who has a UNC offer, Cooper Flagg. We talked about Peterson and we talked about Harwell. We didn't talk about Koa Pete at all, who has a UNC offer. Bryson
Mhm.
Tiller, who has a UNC offer. Even Caden Boozer, who's not ranked in like the top 25 or top 20 for some places, was really good at Peace Jam. So I think just seeing kind of American born stars again dominating in high school is good to see. And I think Carolina will be able to take advantage, and maybe they can land one or two of those guys that they've offered out of the top 10, top 15 in 2025.
I know that'll be music to our listeners' ears. Sean, you got 2 cents before we get out of here?
Shout out to Sherrell for all the information he provided during the first live period, and all the articles that came out were fun reads for especially just being able to watch some of those games online and not being there. So that was great. And then two, I think this is a time, whether it's during or afterwards, we'll start to see kind of the next wave of scholarship offers coming through, whether that's in the 25 or 26 class. So interested to see who that will be. But I'm sure they're working on that, and there'll be a bevy of scouting reports to come with that. So looking forward to see who those players might be.
Well, and as you alluded to a second ago, even fighting through, stuff that even Tussin couldn't cure. Sherrell has been churning out the content. I know you've been doing the same with video analyses and the like. So I just want to tease that for everybody else. Keep checking out. I see we're going to put the good content out there for you. It's up to y'all to take it in and do what you want to do with it. Shout out to you guys for being a part of the show tonight. Shout out to everybody who's listening, or folks that might be listening to this in their podcast feed very soon. We appreciate it. We appreciate Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring and making this happen, and all the goodness that they do over there at johnnytshirt.com, East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. Hit them up. And also special thanks to John Siegley for producing. But for tonight, for Sean Moran and for Sherrell McMillan, I am Joey Powell. We appreciate you being a part of the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. We'll see you next time.